Howdy, folks. I'm Jeff Gonzalez, former Navy SEAL, president of Trident Concepts, and host of the Bulletproof Workshop, powered by AR15.com, where we discuss knowledge, skills, and ability to help bulletproof your everyday performance in whatever your field or passion. Welcome to Podcast 016. My next guest is a veteran criminal defense attorney for over 35 years, having received prestigious ratings and awards. He is among a handful of attorneys who have tried death penalty cases in both the state and federal courts. He was the co-counselor for the defense of George Zimmerman, both in the criminal and civil cases. Considered an expert on self-defense, cases involving firearms, and stand-your-ground law, he has lectured across the country. He is the National Trial Counsel on the CCW Safe Board, where he has developed a panel of network attorneys involved in self-defense and firearm cases. He's a father, attorney, defender of civil rights, knock-knock joke teller, and media target survivor. Please welcome to the show, Don West.
Thank you, Jeff. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Don. The knock-knock joke is kind of like an inside joke for folks that didn't follow the trial, but we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
I thought that was...
Well, I don't know. It may be too soon.
Too soon?
It's only been about 10 years.
It's only been about 10 years. I love it. That's awesome. Wow, 10 years.
Almost, yeah. Next year will be the 10th year of the verdict.
Wow. Man, time flies. First of all, I vividly recall, you know, the just how, and we're going to talk about the media and how it affected both the trial and you, and your kind of like opinion on how the media plays a part in, well, I guess legal cases these days. That's going to be an interesting thing. Before we get too far, I made the mistake of doing this. We got down rabbit holes with the last guest, and it was just so awesome to go right away, but I forgot to do a little intro or a little opportunity for our sponsors. So let's take a quick pause to thank our sponsors. Folks, this show is sponsored by 1776 Insurance. We're talking about comprehensive firearms collection coverage. That also includes your accessories as well as knives. If you've got questions or you want to learn more, please visit 1776insurance.com. And we're back. All right. So, Don, why don't we start with, where do you hail from? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in western Pennsylvania, kind of tucked in the far northwest corner. Geographically, it would be about 40 miles south of Lake Erie.
Okay.
And only 10 miles or so east of the Ohio line.
Okay.
It's a small town, very rural, agricultural, by small, 300-400 people.
Holy cow.
But
wow.
with a twist, and this was interesting. The twist is, nearby was a large, beautiful natural lake and an amusement park that was seasonal.
Huh.
So in the winter, we would hunker down in the snow and the ice. We're part of the snow belt.
Yeah.
There. And friends and family were primarily farmers, some light manufacturing in the general area. And then in the summer, we would be invaded by tourists.
Oh, for sure.
Pittsburgh and Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
And so the place really came alive in the summer, water sports, fishing,
Nice.
that sort of thing. So we were isolated and kind of remote from the rest of the world all winter long. And then for the first time in months, we would see people from different places, different walks of life, you know, people that we didn't usually associate with typically.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a beautiful part of the country, too. I know the winters can be a little rough there, but obviously I guess you were treated to beautiful summers as well, so that's kind of nice. What about in your childhood, was there any kind of impetus that launched you down the legal path, if you will?
That's an interesting question because that was a bit of a winding road.
Yeah, was it? Okay.
Before I got there. A little more background, context. My family was the only family in our larger family that weren't farmers, which meant I spent a lot of time on farms in the summers helping out.
Makes sense.
I wasn't the guy getting up at 4:30 in the morning to do the chores. So I don't think that made me want to be a lawyer, but it made me not want to be a farmer.
Fair enough.
A lot of respect, hard work.
Without a doubt.
Grit and tenacity. And a lot of times not much reward.
So true. And these days especially.
Yeah, tough life.
Really is. Underrated as well. So underrated for us.
Yeah, I think it gets in your blood. And we generations of farmers,
Absolutely.
of course, and it wasn't in mine particularly. There was a cute story I heard about a farmer who won a lottery, and he's being questioned by the newspaper reporter. Now he's got all this money. What's he going to do?
Yeah.
And he thinks about it a second, and he says, I guess I'll just keep farming until the money runs out.
For those that don't appreciate the hard road that farming is, that makes a lot of sense to me. So you had a winding path get into your legal path. Where did it start then? What happened that kind of kicked it off?
My dad was a World War II combat veteran.
Okay.
And after the war, went to Pittsburgh to go to trade school.
Nice.
He took advantage of the GI Bill,
Fantastic.
became a radio and television repairman.
Oh, interesting.
And moved back to where he was from, this little tiny town in this area. My mother was a bit of a transplant. She moved during the Depression and the war periods with her family. Her father was a heavy construction steam shovel operator, so they went where the work was.
Absolutely.
And they wound up in this part of Pennsylvania building a munitions plant.
No way.
And then their lives came together. And,
That's so cool.
And then I was actually born in Pittsburgh because my dad was in school there. So he'd had a lot of exposure to the world. My mother had had some exposure to the world. They knew there was a wide world out there, and it was just a question of finding your place in it.
Yeah.
I had heard that in my distant past there was a lawyer, maybe even a judge, no one I'd ever met.
Okay.
And so it was a passing thought, but not anything that had driven me.
Interesting.
I wanted to do all sorts of different things before I settled on law school. And as it turned out, I think that was the right choice, not only ultimately the right choice, but also kind of the right path to get there.
Interesting.
So grew up, did the typical things that people did in that era, in that community.
Yeah.
Went to college.
Oh.
And didn't have a clear focus then. Law school was a possibility, but it wasn't why I was there.
Interesting.
I was still in that phase of girls and baseball.
I think many of us still are, but so what college did you end up going to?
I went to the University of Pennsylvania.
Nice.
In Philadelphia, and that again wasn't something that I had so well thought out. That I was looking at colleges. I had 2 or 3 in mind. There were some pretty good small colleges around our area where most of my friends went, and most people sort of stuck around. And I just remember having this conversation with my cousin, a guy I didn't see very often because he lived in Florida. He said, I always wanted to go to the University of Pennsylvania, but I couldn't get in. So that was a challenge.
I hear you. Now I've got.
I said I can get in, or at least I'm going to try to get in. And if I did, I did. If I didn't, I didn't. And I did.
Nice.
So all of a sudden, I'm from a town of 300-400 people, right in the middle of West Philadelphia.
Yeah, Philly. That's a little bit of a culture shock there. Wow.
Yeah,
what time period was this?
Eye-opener. So this is late. Well, I matriculated 1969, the summer of Woodstock.
Wow!
And the Mets winning the World Series. So that was a big.
That was a big year. That was a big summer. Okay, so wow, what a time that would have been to be around. How was Philly at that time period? I hear so many different. I have a very good friend. She grew up there and left at about 7, I think, maybe 10. I can't remember what year it was, or 7 or 10. Between 7 and 10, she moved away. But she talks about how much. How it was a very cultural, diverse city. She grew up there and had many fun things to say of it, and now she doesn't recognize it hardly at all. So what was it like back then for you, coming from a small town to a big town like that?
Other than the whole eyes wide open, I can't believe what I'm seeing, and everything I learned about how I should conduct myself in public now has to be retrofit to urban life.
I never even thought of it that way.
And that was the campus. I think was in a period of transition. I think the city was in a period of transition physically.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, Jeff, this is right in Vietnam.
Right.
Vietnam is going on.
Yeah.
So my trip to college was because I had a student deferment. It kind of wrestled with what to do. I turned 18. I registered for the draft.
Yeah.
I'm eligible for a student deferment at that point. My dad, as I mentioned, is a World War II combat vet, European theater.
Wow.
My mother was pretty adamant about me not going into the military. She's just scared.
Yeah, of course, like every mom would be.
Mm-hmm. My dad wasn't particularly vocal. He didn't encourage me. So, and in fact, most of my friends who had a college deferment took advantage of it.
Nice.
A couple of people enlisted, but most people didn't, right in my group.
Interesting.
So I didn't either. I went to college.
Yeah.
And then interestingly, by the time I was ready to get out in the spring of 1973,
everything was winding down.
Yeah, the draft ended, and I didn't have to make that choice. And I have some regrets. On the other hand, there's so many tragic stories, right?
So true. I mean, that's a hard one to unroll, because you are where you are today because of the decisions that you made. So it's kind of, I understand regret too. I sometimes use that term loosely, but in this case, I feel like it definitely proved to be the right choice for you. What was your major though back then? If it wasn't law,
history. It was a
history.
liberal arts.
Oh, liberal.
In
love
college.
history. Oh, I love history. I could study history all my life if I could.
That was an upside down time in our society.
What do you mean by that?
Well, here's a good example. You may have heard of the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Most people consider it to be the best business school in the world.
Wow.
If someone says, "Oh, I went to Wharton," they're bragging.
I hear you. Right.
You can't sit in a room for 5 minutes with somebody who went to Harvard without hearing it 5 times.
For sure.
Right? Same thing with Wharton.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's
all
hilarious.
The Wharton grads. I mean, that's what Donald Trump boasts about. If he's talking about his education, that's what will come up.
Interesting.
He went to Wharton. So this was a time of cultural, political disruption where now I don't know who gets into Wharton, frankly. I've never met a person, I don't think, that's really smart enough or skilled enough to get in, although they obviously do.
Obviously, yeah.
I couldn't. But in the era there, people would actually apply to Wharton because it was easier to get in than the College of Liberal Arts.
You're kidding.
And then transfer. Yeah, as I say, it's
wow,
an anomaly.
that is a very
some ways.
upside down, topsy turvy kind of scenario. Holy cow, that's.
But I had that Wharton available to me. I took courses there.
Yeah.
But business wasn't a major.
Was it?
I wasn't really driven by business.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think maybe ultimately, to my credit, I don't feel like I've ever been driven by money. It's important. You have to pay the bills. You have to feed your family. You have to have enough to make a comfortable life. But unlike a lot of people that I was around, especially those that were in the business school, it seemed to be an obsessive thing.
Without
so driven by it, it clouded every other decision that they made. And I feel blessed that I was able to make my mistakes and do some things without at every moment feeling that I had to go make more money.
Interesting. All right, so you graduated from college with a history degree. What happened at that point? Did you go into the law field at that point, or did you kind of play the field a little bit?
Well, as I was getting a little closer to graduation, I started thinking about that.
Okay.
Of course, what I was going to do. I thought at one point maybe I would go into education. I played baseball. I played baseball every day of my life, probably since I was 8 or 9 years old, and I was fortunate enough to play in high school, played 4 years in college.
Nice.
And that was a big part of it, and I knew I wasn't going to play forever, although I still had some aspirations of...
Every kid does, yeah.
And by the time I was close to getting out of college, I was I played semi-pro ball for
No way.
2 or 3 years.
Right on.
And never got to that next level, but I was actually played in Canada
No
a couple
way.
of years, and they paid me to play. And
That's awesome.
it was a spectacular experience. This fits into the bigger
Perfect.
question that you've
Bring
asked.
Bring
but
it.
That was a big part of it. My mother had been an educator, 7th grade English teacher. I suffered and was blessed by that too.
I can appreciate that. I know that feeling.
So, and it just so happened that there was a program available to me when I was a senior in college that I could enroll in a master's program, stay on an extra semester, and get a master's degree.
Oh, wow.
So it was effectively, I got double credit for the classes this spring semester, and then I took another semester and wound up with a graduate degree. So I stayed.
Nice.
I stayed and wound up with a master's degree in education, thinking that I would teach, maybe. I wasn't quite sure how that would go, and I had a lot of respect for the coaches that I had. I liked that role in life.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so when I got out of school, I had a bachelor's and a master's degree, and I thought I was pretty well equipped to tackle the world.
Yeah. And?
Well, to continue with the chronological sequence, I also had a girlfriend who moved to California at that point. She was a graduate student. She is so smart, so brilliant. We're talking organic chemistry, microbiology, that kind of smart.
Yes, right? I know that.
So I moved out there too, and I was going to find my way. And I did. I waited tables. I worked. I sold Time Life subscriptions over the telephone.
Oh my God!
As you might imagine, I was inching a little closer towards law school at this point.
I imagine. Yeah.
So there was a point where a friend of mine, was a college roommate of mine, went to law school. Told me about it. So he's a couple of years ahead of me at this point.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I can do that. I think I can do that.
Yeah.
I was always a pretty decent student, not
terrible. Clearly, I mean, you got your master's.
Could, yeah. So I didn't have the funds to just drop what I was doing and enroll, so I looked around and I found a part-time program, an evening program at Loyola Law School, downtown Los Angeles. I was living in Orange County, and thought, well, I'll take the LSATs and give it a shot. Because it was part-time, though, I was still working. I was working full-time at various things, none of which I really liked. And I started school.
A little motivation there for you?
So I started law school. I liked it. Met some friends that, to this day, that I still have. But it wasn't really doing it for me.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know what I was hoping to find that I didn't. I enjoyed the thinking process, teaching people how to think in a different way.
Okay.
But it was okay. I was still going. I was still taking the tests and getting grades.
Yeah.
But there was still something missing. And when I was in college, I had spent a semester working at the campus radio station, which I really liked. It was just so much fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed the camaraderie. So even though I was in law school, I decided, since it was a part-time program, I'm going to see if I can get back into something like that.
Okay. And
I started working at a small station in Orange County, California. Worked there for a few months, got fired. That's a recurring theme.
Is that right?
That's
okay.
A recurring theme. And then I found another station in Los Angeles. It had been on the air under different call letters. It went back on the air, and it was becoming kind of a big deal. Let me circle back and say, when I said I'm fortunate enough never to have been really driven by money, what that translated for me is I've done a lot of things where I didn't get paid or I didn't get paid very much, but I really wanted to do them.
Yeah.
And I thought that if I did them well, something would come of it.
Smart.
Well, there was this station. It was in Pasadena, And I went up there and I said, you don't have to pay me at all if you don't want to. I'd like it if you did, but I'll do public affairs stuff. I have a college degree. I have a little bit of experience in radio. And they said, come on in.
Nice.
So I worked there, news, public affairs, and wanted to be on the air. And then one night, the overnight disc jockey, probably under the influence of PCP or whatever was going around at that time, said some stuff he shouldn't have said out loud with the mic on.
Oh.
And he was gone. And just like that, I went from working in the back room editing clips to being on the air full time.
You're kidding.
That's right.
Holy cow.
So I was a
Can I
disc
call you a disc jockey?
I absolutely was a disc jockey in Los Angeles for
You're kidding.
several years.
That is so awesome. So cool. How was that? That's got to be like a cool job.
Yes. Yes. Rock and roll, baby.
Yeah, I love it. Oh my God. Oh wow. So and you were still going to law school at this time?
Yes.
Holy
yeah.
cow.
So I'm working the night shift, and then things happen at the station. I actually wind up working the morning show at one point. I'm doing drive time.
Oh, wow.
And met some great people, learned a whole lot, really enjoyed it. But I actually met some legends of radio. You wouldn't necessarily know them here, but from Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
In particular, and some of them have national names.
Wow.
And
like for example?
Oh, you may know of a guy named Shadow Stevens.
Yeah. I grew up in a time period where radio was very popular. I know Shadow Stevens. Absolutely. That is so cool.
There was a wild, crazy, brilliant guy from Tyler named Jimmy Rabbit, who was on the air in Los Angeles, KMET for a while, and worked with him at the station, who I think may be the best disc jockey I've ever heard.
Wow.
But he's, well.
That's another story.
A guy named Stephen Clean. Yeah,
I don't think I knew that one either.
He's a sort of a disc jockey.
Gotcha.
In any event, so I'm doing this, and I'm loving it, and I'm going to law school, and I'm liking it so much, and I'm thinking maybe this is what I want to do.
Interesting.
I'm not great at it. I'm good enough, I thought, to keep my job and to work at it. I'm not one of those brilliant minds, and I'm certainly not the musicologist that a lot of these guys were.
Yeah.
But I was working, and so I actually quit law school.
Oh, really?
Point. I had about 2 years in.
Holy cow.
I quit law school, and I thought, I'll do this radio thing.
Yeah.
I like it. About 2.5 months later, I guess, I got fired.
From the disc jockey
Got fired from the radio station. The program director cleaned house. I think he was worried about his job. So just one of those things where it goes.
Yep, we see that. Yeah.
So here I am in Los Angeles, now out of a job and not in school.
Oh, boy.
Wanted to give the radio thing a little more time, so my next job was in Philadelphia. I'm coast to coast, right?
Holy cow.
I wind up working at WMMR in Philadelphia for a while, several months, enjoyed it, liked the crowd. I was living right down Center City, Rittenhouse Square area.
Oh, nice.
Of Philadelphia, and then I got fired. You learn that there are people that last forever and they'll work 25 years at one station. That's not the norm.
No, it doesn't appear that way.
For sure. I was really lucky enough, though, that soon thereafter I got another job. I got a job at Chum FM in Toronto. Oh. So here I go from Los Angeles to Philadelphia to Toronto.
Wow.
And I'm working there for a while and really, really enjoy it, but my visa expires. And they found a capable Canadian to do my job, so they did it. So here I am in Toronto. I had the girlfriend I mentioned to you about from Los Angeles has now graduated and with her PhD.
Holy cow.
And is now in a postdoctoral program in Toronto.
How did that happen?
Yeah, I know. So I decided maybe this would be a good time to go back to law school.
Fair enough.
And that's what I did. And I transferred all my credits to SUNY at Buffalo, State University of New York at
Okay.
Buffalo. They were wonderful, gracious people. They took my credits. They allowed me to transfer mid-year, and I just stayed on full-time until I finished.
Nice.
And that's how I became a lawyer.
That is quite the circuitous route. I mean, literally circuitous. California, Philadelphia, Toronto, Buffalo. Whew. Okay. So you're now a lawyer.
Well, I still have to take the bar.
My bad. Okay. So you graduate from law school.
Yes.
And now you go for the bar. Okay.
Yes. And I decide to take a bar. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet.
Okay.
And I go to Florida at that point. I had family there, and I didn't have any family in New York State. And I go to Florida, and I take the bar there.
Okay.
So the problem with that in terms of getting a job and practicing is I took the bar, but I applied kind of late. I passed the bar.
Nice.
But I wasn't admitted as a lawyer. And there's a background and character fitness investigation that's done that can take months and months sometimes. And I had moved around a lot. You've gotten just a taste of that, right?
Oh, man.
So they check you out, and this
So
is
that delays the
pre-internet
process?
and
Yes.
stuff. So there's a lot of legwork involved. And it took several months for me to actually be admitted, but I needed a job. And there happened to be a little wrinkle where I could work for certain state agencies as a legal intern, go to court, do everything a lawyer did, but not yet be admitted.
Okay.
So when I didn't get another job, they said, well, we can't use you if you're not a member of the bar.
Okay.
I started looking at options. And one day I drove to Sanford, Florida, which,
Yeah, I know where that's at.
what was that? 30 years later became the courthouse where the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin trial took place.
Are you kidding me?
So I drove to Sanford and I met with a prosecutor and said, I'm applying for a job. I'm qualified under the legal intern program. And they said, you know, we don't have a job here for you. There's one over on the coast if you want, but we don't have a job here. Although I heard the public defender's office is hiring and they're across the street.
Nice.
So I went from a prospective prosecutor
Yes.
across the street to an assistant public defender within like an hour and a half.
Okay.
And
wow.
that was the beginning of my legal career.
Okay. So you started as a public defender.
I did. In the
Interesting.
state system.
How did you like that?
It took some adjusting.
I hear a lot. I hear good and bad things about. You know, it's like a
Yeah.
great place to cut your teeth, but it's ruthless and it's like very kind of like a beast of its own in a sense.
Well, like every other walk of life, you find people that are there for the paycheck and there because they're committed to do the work. You find people that do the work even in the face of personal sacrifice, and others that maybe are equally committed but don't have the resources. So all of those things were true in my experience at the Public Defender's Office. Really good, committed lawyers, skilled lawyers, people that worked nights and weekends and holidays. When they took it on, they went all in.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's the mentality, I think, of a trial lawyer.
Interesting.
When you're in, you're all in, whatever that takes.
I love that. Let's stop here for just a brief moment because your experience there, starting off as a public defender, you know, and a lot of people aren't aware of exactly how the legal system works. There's there on the surface, it should seem simple to people, but it's a little bit more complex. And what you had mentioned is while there might be somebody that is interested in a lawyer, they just can't afford a good lawyer. So fortunately for us, the Sixth Amendment provides for us in that sense, and so that's where many public, that's where the public can sometimes get misconstrued about what happens at that point. So if you're unable to provide your own legal services, then there is, and I understand it varies from state to state, but you are entitled to legal counsel provided to you from whatever that state entity is. How do you know as the person seeking legal counsel, how do you know you're getting good representation, because it is also the beginning of many legal careers. And so there's not a lot of experience there. How do you tap into that? Like, how do you know the people that are all in right in the beginning of their career? How do you recognize that? Looking back, was there something that you could tell by this person? There was this trait, there was this ethic, there was this kind of like drive that would be helpful for somebody to quickly assess. I know that's impossibility, but I'm just curious. Like, if I had to take advantage of a public defender, I would obviously ask what their experience is. But that's I can't assume that they're going to have a lot from that office. So the next best thing is that work ethic, that drive that you mentioned that some of them have. How do you recognize that?
That's a terrific question. The way the public defender system is designed, it's as a safety net, in the sense that if people are charged with a crime facing incarceration, the Constitution has been interpreted to require counsel for those that can't afford it their own. Now, of course, it doesn't take as much money to hire a lawyer if you're accused of shoplifting as it does if you're accused of first-degree murder.
Interesting. Funny how that works.
Yeah. So the system exists in many different forms, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
In Florida, the program that I was involved in was a state-run agency. So the people that worked there were state employees.
Okay.
Other states use a county system where lawyers are appointed by the court, not working for the public defender's office, then paid by the hour, typically, or a flat fee for the case. So they would typically have their own private practice.
Okay.
And then also do some court-appointed work.
Interesting.
So depending on what system you're involved in and where you are, you could wind up with an exceptional and successful criminal defense lawyer who makes a living practicing exclusively criminal defense and chooses to take court-appointed cases to either supplement the practice, to avoid having to do divorces or wills in order to keep the doors open. But I used to think of it as a way to keep the system honest because of what you said. You know, if the public defenders are overworked, overwhelmed, underfunded, and frankly, some of the best trial lawyers I have ever seen in my life are public defenders.
You're kidding.
They're
amazing.
Exceptionally skilled. They're doing it every day. Those that are committed and smart, are exceptional.
That's awesome.
So you could very well wind up with a lawyer who takes the case on a court appointment and believes that their role to maintain the integrity and the dignity of the system is to be damn sure that client gets the best he or she's got.
I love that.
That keeps everybody honest.
I love that, yeah. So that seems like that's far and few between.
How do you evaluate
Yes.
that? Well, almost the same way that you evaluate someone else when you're eyeballing them. When you're talking to a doctor, what's the bedside manner? Do you get the sense that they really care about you or the case, or are they just looking at their watch trying to get this thing over with? It's really hard to tell, and frankly, it's even hard to tell when you're out in the private marketplace shopping around. The people with the reputations aren't necessarily the best at what they do. They may be the best at marketing and branding.
I know that one very well, and that's why I wanted, to probe you a little bit on that question, because I imagine that, like any industry, there are those that are very good at promoting themselves, and while they might do a good job at promoting themselves, there might be somebody else who doesn't do a good job at promoting themselves, but is just has superior skills in that sense, and gets kind of like glossed over, or he stays or she stays more in the shadows just because the publicity is let's face it, when you're shopping around for something, you're looking for something that's bright and shiny. And that's how things work these days, unfortunately.
And how do you shop these days? Well, when I was in those early days of practicing law, you didn't go online and look for a lawyer.
Right.
You went to the Yellow Pages or asked a friend or a neighbor.
Yeah. And just like even then, you go to the Yellow Pages, you usually picked the bigger ad. who paid for the bigger space inside the yellow page instead of just having the name and number. Is like, what kind of ad did they have? And that a lot of times gave you insight into maybe not the best barometer for their skill level, but you knew that they were invested in trying to promote themselves. So
well, they were invested in paying for the ad.
there you go. That's that one for sure.
That requires a lot of generating income.
Well,
that
you like
bill
to
comes every
think
month.
you like to think that if they went through the effort of putting a big ad, that they have a steady stream of business to support it. At least that's how I would look at it.
We're talking about criminal defense here in this conversation, Jeff, and I'm not sure the marketing stuff is quite as applicable to criminal defense lawyers as it would be to other areas of practice, personal injury work or medical malpractice.
For sure.
Toxic tort stuff. You've seen the Camp Lejeune.
Oh, yeah.
That's a whole different, completely different thing.
You're absolutely right. That's a good point, and it's not fair to use a broad brush. When it comes to trial lawyers, let me ask you this question a little differently then. What do you view to be, like in your case, what as a successful trial lawyer, what do you view as your superpower, that like character trait that might be something that I would look for in another potential trial lawyer?
Across the board, in my experience, trial lawyers have big egos.
Okay.
They almost have to, because a lot of what you do is kind of a high wire act. You better be confident.
I like
you
that.
better know what you're doing and be able to sell it.
I like
so
that.
There's a lot of that comes with what the practice requires of you. At the same time, people that have big egos a lot of times seem to feel the need to generate positive affirmation. They want to be the loudest person in the room. They want to get
I hear you.
all the attention.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily an effective approach to trial practice in my mind. The
Okay.
jury is looking for the person, wow, they can be impressed with, that knows what they're doing and that sort of thing. But in terms of interacting with the people that you interact with that will help you be successful, you need to be able to communicate with them.
I like that.
And if it's all about you, you're not hearing what they're saying. So I think if I have any superpower in that regard, air quotes around that, it's learning to listen first and talk later.
I like that.
It's recognizing who the audience is and recognizing that the people that will make the decision that will affect the rest of your client's life are not the people that you necessarily went to school with or grew up with or hang around with on weekends.
Yeah.
They're the guys that you work construction with in the summer. They're the guys that you have a drink with in the corner bar when you don't know anybody else.
I like
They're
that.
the receptionists and the checkout clerks and the car mechanics. And that's why I think I have been successful as a trial lawyer, and is because of that circuitous route I took. When I was in high school, I worked construction in the summers. I worked for a concrete company. We poured sidewalks and hard physical work.
That is, yeah.
And this is a conservative, largely white community in northwestern Pennsylvania. The construction crew I worked with was owned and run by a black man.
Nice.
All the skilled employees were black.
Nice.
And my cousin and I were the only white people that worked for the company.
Wow.
And we ate together, we drank together, we weren't allowed to drink together, but
back then.
Yeah. And we gambled together
Oh, I
and
love
stuff like that. So I had a window into a culture and a lifestyle that I would never have gotten otherwise, except I just happened to be there for that.
And you kind of like that also like followed you throughout, your circuitous route in California, how you work jobs that maybe you didn't like to work, but put you in contact with other people that forced you to, again, to kind of develop those skills. And then as you moved, I guess, maybe Philly not so much, but at least in California, having some of those jobs that you didn't like at first seems to me like that would also help polish off that skill set.
Getting fired
Yeah.
makes you pretty humble.
Yes.
That helps. And
Yes.
Playing on sports teams helps you appreciate the value of teamwork, the importance
God,
of
yes.
putting the team ahead of yourself.
Love that.
Some of that stuff. That's why I say it all kind of fits together.
Totally, man.
And then when you're in the courtroom working, this is why I think it finally became the right fit for me. It allowed me to use all of that at the same time. The ability to connect and relate to people, not being so super impressed with myself that I didn't listen to what people were telling me, not being so ugly and condescending that I offended people when all I wanted to do was get the truth from what they were saying.
For sure.
How many lawyers are snarky and sarcastic and mocking? That's because they don't know what to do really, so they sort of fall into that
I could
obnoxious
see that.
stuff.
I could see that.
And then it's kind of like my colleague Mark O'Mara used to call it multidimensional chess. And that's who the audience is, because the jury is an audience.
Yeah.
They're going to make the decision guilty, not guilty. And in a death penalty case, they'll make the decision whether your client lives or dies.
Yeah.
You've got the judge who's an audience because he or she is going to decide whether to sustain or overrule the objection, what evidence to let in or not. And then you're also playing for the appellate court. You've got to protect the record and say things in a certain way so that if you lose and you go up on appeal, the record is clear and you have your chance there.
That is.
And then you put all of that together in a high-profile case like the Zimmerman case, and then you have the media on top of all of that.
That's like
You've got
6 layers.
Yeah.
Well, quick word from our sponsor. We've been working with the folks at 1776 for comprehensive insurance of our firearms collections, and I'm really happy with how things are going so far. And one of my concerns is with the amount of commuting that I do with my firearms collection. What happens should my vehicle be broken into or stolen with my firearms? And there's reason to have this concern because there's 800,000 vehicles stolen per year in America. So it's not, it's a little bit more common than we might think. What I mentioned earlier is that they have a comprehensive insurance plan, which is that they will cover your firearms stolen out of your vehicle, or should your vehicle be stolen, cover the firearms that were in the vehicle. So that's pretty reassuring in a sense. So I've mentioned this before, but the process to apply is pretty easy. Approval is pretty quick. They do not require you provide a itemization or serialized numbers. There's no appraisal or schedules that you have to provide. So really all you want to do is just make sure you have proof of ownership, and that's it. So if you want to learn more about the folks from 1776 and insuring your firearms collection, visit 1776insurance.com. I want to get to the Zimmerman. I wanted to have a good kind of roll up to people get an understanding. So when you started off in the public defender's office, how long did it take before you feel like you kind of like developed that skill? Was it something that came to you quickly, or did it take some time to evolve to that point where you found you recognize this is where I belong?
It was a evolution.
Okay.
When you go into something, you have good and bad influences, and you
Okay.
don't necessarily know which is which.
Right.
So it
That's
takes
true.
some time to sort that out. And the big shot, hothead, hey, look at me types were the ones you see first.
Yes.
And they're the ones that you think you might want to emulate or
Associate
associate
Yeah.
with. And then you realize pretty soon that most of it's bluster. But my mother was probably the stronger personality of my parents.
Okay.
My dad was pretty quiet and reserved, not surly or unfriendly, just quiet. My mother was much more outgoing, and I didn't know these were lessons at the time, but it sort of later on it sort of filled in that it was clear she couldn't stand hypocrites. She could not stand liars and cheaters. She rooted for the underdog.
Oh, yes.
And I think above most, maybe, no matter where she was or who she was with, it was important to her to make people feel welcome, included.
Yeah.
So if you put all of that stuff together, that's a pretty good skill set for a trial lawyer. And I didn't know that
At the time, of course.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I'm just maybe figuring out some of that now. I have learned, I think, that if you treat someone genuinely and sincerely, not only are you likely to get a genuine and sincere response, but you're going to be much more effective as both a trial lawyer and a human being.
The golden rule. That's kind of like another long-standing rule there. So it takes you some time to kind of find your way, but you do. And now, about what time period was that when you finally found your way? You feel like, okay, the trial lawyer path is for me. I'm doing well at it. I'm enjoying it. It's fulfilling. About what time period was that?
I was at the state public defender's office almost 5 years, and that's a very concentrated litigation phase. You're trying lots and lots of cases. That's why it's good training, is because it's trial by fire, and you're trying a lot of cases. Sure. In private practice, even no matter how busy you are, you're not trying a lot of cases.
5 years.
In the state court system, it wasn't unusual to try 3 or 4 cases a month sometimes, and that really adds up when you think about most lawyers try a handful of cases in their career.
Wow.
So that was the trial by fire, and I wanted to then take the next step.
Okay.
I wanted to continue doing criminal work, and I thought I was getting some local recognition. I'd had some successes. I had people that wanted to hire me, and I went into private practice.
Okay.
And what had really captivated me at the end of my public defender phase was, I told you before that I was, I played baseball. I was not, yes, I was competitive. There's no question about it, competitive. Not crazy competitive,
right.
not stomp the ground and punch the wall if I lost competitive, but absolutely there's something about that I really liked.
Yes.
Because I was feeling it emotionally when I was getting ready to try a case.
Yeah.
And I'm putting on my suit.
Yeah.
It's like suiting up.
Suiting up. Yeah.
You're getting ready. You're getting your tunnel vision. You're getting your game face. You are all in at that moment. And I loved that part. So I started gravitating toward more and more significant cases within the criminal world. To me, that meant serious felonies, then it meant murder, and then it meant death penalty.
Wow.
So my interest in the death penalty work was not so much because of my personal or views of the death penalty. It was because, to me, that was the major leagues.
Yeah. You're playing for keeps, literally.
Playing for keeps, and your client's life may very well be determined by what you do or don't do, and you've got to be willing to take that on.
That is a huge risk.
Yeah, you're living with it.
Yeah.
But it was also thrilling.
Oh, imagine.
I'm not such a risk taker in my personal life,
but in the professional, pretty much that's like skydiving from outer space almost. So
that's what was driving me at that point professionally.
I can see that, and I can totally appreciate that, because that drive. Let me ask you this question this way: did you prefer not to lose, or did you prefer to win as far as success is concerned? Like, some people, like, they don't want to lose at all, but then at the same time they're not as focused, because it's mutually exclusive. Not wanting to lose is one thing, wanting to win is another. And a lot of times people think they're the same, but they're different. Like, I know a lot of people that are they do everything they can just so that they don't lose, but they don't do everything they can to ensure the win. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel like you fit into that kind of scenario?
That's a fascinating approach to it. I didn't look at it exactly like that.
Okay, fair enough.
I looked at it as it was. Let me kind of back up and look at it this way. Winning and losing in court is misunderstood, I think, a lot, because you just look at the verdict. And if the verdict in a criminal case is not guilty, you won. If it's guilty, you lost.
Okay.
And Sure, that's a big part of it.
Okay.
What really, really griped me, and I think why I was so motivated to continue doing the criminal work, and this is probably back to my influence of my mother, she just couldn't stand, injustice or that people weren't treated fairly. She really thought that you had the right to be treated fairly.
100%.
So as a criminal defense lawyer, that's what you're really doing. You are fighting tooth and nail. You are fighting as zealously and as passionately as you can to be sure that your client is treated fairly by the system.
Okay.
The goal isn't necessarily to win. That might be the outcome.
I hear you now.
But the goal is to be sure that your client doesn't get screwed. And how can they get screwed? Well, they can get screwed because a witness lies and gets away with it, because a judge is biased one way or another or makes a bad decision, because a prosecutor wants to attain higher office, wants to become a senator.
Sure.
And they need some notches in their belt
Without
to
a
do
doubt.
that.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we do, I think, as criminal defense lawyers is being sure that the person gets treated fairly, that people play by the rules, they stay within the lines,
Okay.
and that the process works. It's a good process.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, no one has come up with a better one, but that's only if the lawyers are good, the judge is good, and everybody plays by the rules. And then you can go essentially balls to the wall.
I like the way you answered that, because it makes sense in this, like the driving force is, to ensure the integrity of the system and to make sure that the client gets the best chance at that integrity of the system. So I like how you kind of approach that question, or the answer to your question. So about what time frame was that, though, that you feel like the trial lawyer path was for you? And the reason why I'm asking that question is, how much time did you have before the Zimmerman case was brought to you?
I would say that I kind of hit my stride in knowing what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, the kinds of cases I wanted to do, and also, of course, juggling family life as well.
That's
probably mid-90s,
okay.
I would guess. I'd been at it 10 or 15 years by then, and I think it takes that long,
I would say.
actually.
And in that time period, you had quite a few high-profile cases as well during that time frame before the Zimmerman case. Do you feel like those cases are what led to you being asked to co-counsel with Zimmerman? Do you feel like that had an influence on that decision? Not your decision, but on being asked to be co-counsel with them.
Well, I think so. A lot of that was just serendipity, though. In the sense that I met Mark O'Mara back when we were both very young, new lawyers. We were colleagues and friends. We had worked on other cases together over the years.
Oh, that's nice.
We didn't have the same practice, and our practices went slightly different directions, but we had regular contact. We appreciated each other's thinking enough to want to bounce stuff off each other when we had an interesting case. We had tried a death penalty case a few years before.
Okay.
His practice kind of branched out. He started doing some family work and some other things. I was just doing criminal defense work. Most criminal defense lawyers are kind of lone wolf types, small practices, maybe a lawyer or two, but it's not these
giant firms
typically, unless they have a unit for white-collar fraud embezzlers or SEC violators.
Yes.
That kind of stuff.
That makes sense.
So by the mid-'90s, there was some legislation. Clinton had sponsored this bill that the end result, among other things, was the federal government becoming very aggressive in prosecuting federal death penalty cases.
Okay.
The kinds of crimes, the number of statutes for which the death penalty could be sought expanded.
Oh, wow.
And the federal government became very aggressive, especially in locations where there was not a state death penalty available. Florida had had a state death penalty for a long time, and I was along the way doing those kinds of cases.
Okay.
But then in the mid to late 90s, the federal government got pretty aggressive, and the U.S. attorney in Puerto Rico started prosecuting a lot of federal death penalty cases. Now, there wasn't the death penalty under the Commonwealth law in Puerto Rico. It had been 50 or 75 years. So when the federal government started prosecuting these cases, there was a dearth of lawyers, very good criminal defense lawyers in Puerto Rico, but very few that had any death penalty experience. Federal law required a lawyer with death penalty experience that was, in a sense, certified to be qualified to handle that kind of work.
Huh.
So the federal courts in Puerto Rico came stateside to look for lawyers that had been doing that kind of work.
Okay.
I had been doing it at the state level. In particular, I tried a number of those cases.
Yeah.
And I was one of a handful of lawyers that were selected to go to Puerto Rico and handle these cases.
Interesting.
So about the time I sort of felt I was comfortable and knowledgeable and in my own skin,
Yeah.
we started litigating that stuff. So that was, to me, another level.
I was just going to ask
another
that.
level.
I was just going to ask that. I mean, obviously the outcome is the same, but is there a difference between the state and the federal cases? I would imagine the federal cases. Well, actually, I don't know. I'm speculating. That's all I could do. But you had mentioned that the federal cases were one level up or a level above the state, and how so? How did you? How was it so that it was one level up? What made a difference?
Part of it, I think, would be resources.
Yes.
The U.S. attorney had the resources.
Exactly.
We're dealing with federal law enforcement agencies.
Yes.
Dealing with the FBI and ATF.
Yeah.
On that stuff. And they were well funded and committed.
Yeah.
There was much more control over the process. Washington was typically involved all the way up to the Attorney General.
Wow.
To sign off on some of this stuff. We would typically go to Washington to present reasons why the government should not seek the death penalty to a capital case review committee in D.C. They would make their decisions,
Holy cow.
refer it to the Attorney General, then the Attorney General would either authorize it or not.
Interesting.
And we would move forward. So once the federal government decided, yes, they were going to seek the death penalty, that was full bore at that point. In the state court, around the same time, Florida was kind of weird. It's a little bit different now, and maybe we could even talk about the difference between where it was then and now. But
for sure.
But then you could get the death penalty by a jury majority. So
interesting.
A death penalty case has two phases. The first phase is guilt or innocence.
Correct.
The people on the jury have to unanimously decide whether the person is guilty or not guilty. And of course, if it's guilty, it has to be of a charge for which the death penalty can be authorized.
Okay.
So I've had lots of death penalty cases, for example, where we went to trial on first-degree murder facing the death penalty, but the jury wasn't convinced it was first degree. It was maybe the verdict was second degree or manslaughter.
Okay.
So even though there may have been a conviction, it was no longer a death penalty case.
Got it.
So you've got to get the conviction for the death penalty, and then there's a second trial. The sentencing phase is convened, penalty phase, and then the jury looks at different evidence in addition to what they've already seen. So the focus then becomes the quality and nature and characteristics of the crime, but then also the background and character of the defendant, of the accused, the mitigating evidence. What is out there that might support a sentence of less than death?
I gotcha.
So once you go through that entire process, back in those days in Florida, if the jury decided by 7-5 that death was appropriate, the judge had every ability to impose the death sentence at that point. Only if it was 6-6 or
less.
Was it going to be a life sentence? Federal court's always been unanimous, 12. You have to get 12.
Interesting.
And there's no mistrials in the penalty phase. In in a guilt phase, if all 12 can't decide, if they're hung, so to speak, it's a mistrial and you start over.
Ugh.
In the penalty phase, if the jury isn't unanimous, then it defaults to a life sentence.
Okay.
And that's what happened recently in Florida with the Parkland shooter.
Oh, really?
The Marjorie Stoneman Douglas
Yeah,
shooter
yeah.
tragically killed, 17 students? And,
Yes.
that was very controversial, of course, because can you imagine what case would be deserving of the death penalty if that one isn't?
I was just gonna
if that one isn't, what is gonna?
Yeah, how? That's a good question. Like, in that case, it had to be unanimous?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So somebody or multiple people on that jury felt as though the acts committed by the shooter did not warrant the death penalty.
Interesting, because in a sense, yes, but not because they weren't heinous or atrocious or cruel or in any way justified. None of that stuff. The explanation was, notwithstanding the horror of what happened, there was one juror that was the strongest, and apparently before the final vote was made, 2 more joined. So it was 9 in favor of the death penalty and 3 against. The thinking was that the death penalty wasn't warranted in this particular case because of his mental health history.
I was wondering about that. You know, I mean, that does bear into the equation. Somebody that could walk into a school and commit that type of atrocity certainly has something going on upstairs, something wrong. That just seems very... There seems to be something cognitively wrong up there. So I suppose in that case I can see that, but still, you're right to pose the question: if that doesn't warrant the death penalty, then what kind of crime would moving forward? And does that set a precedence for us?
Well, it's interesting in many ways, many different levels, because in some respects there is no crime that standing alone warrants the death penalty. That's what the Supreme Court has said. The Eighth Amendment guarantees an individualized sentence.
Okay.
That's why there's no automatic death penalty.
Right.
There is no crime that you can commit that just demands the death penalty legally.
Okay.
All that stuff was done away with years ago. So there's always the individualized sentencing that the Eighth Amendment requires, which then shifts the focus to the individual.
Okay.
And regardless of what they've done or how horrible it is, they have the right to present mitigating evidence for the jury's consideration. At the end of the day, the jury then decides the balance, the aggravating and the mitigating circumstances, and individually, this isn't a group decision.
Right.
Individually, they decide for them, does the mitigating outweigh the aggravating or vice versa.
Interesting.
In this particular case, the defense lawyers who did a remarkable job, if you don't look at anything but the outcome, this fella was abused in the womb, with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And he may very well have suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome and stuff that meant he was doomed
from the beginning.
That was
literally
that was the catchridge, doomed
at
from
birth?
the womb.
Yeah, doomed from the womb. That's right. I remember that now.
But it's a fascinating intellectual thing.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by it. I didn't have a particular view of the death penalty when I started doing death penalty cases. It just wasn't something that I had focused on or wasn't a crusader or a true believer of that. I was intrigued by the process, still am.
Yeah.
The more exposure I have, the more suspicious I am of it as a system. If nothing else, this case we just now talked about.
Yeah.
Right? If it's not going to be sufficient to get the death penalty, why spend the money? Why make the effort? And who should get it and who doesn't get it isn't consistent. Is it arbitrary? Is it capricious? Is it who the lawyer is?
Yeah.
So if you're not going to have that kind of consistency and you run the risk of false convictions.
Yeah.
We know that exists.
Yeah.
We know innocent people have been executed. There was a guy convicted of murder just released from prison after, 25 years in a notorious case that was in a serialized podcast that
Yeah.
just was in the news. So that's where my ambivalence comes, is it doesn't seem to do what it's designed to do, and it's incredibly expensive, and it's becomes a political hot potato.
So does.
But it hurts me emotionally to think that people can get away with that kind of horror.
Yeah.
But it's not getting away with it. We
Yeah.
just don't have a good, effective system
And
to deal with it.
I was going to ask you this question. The death penalty was designed. Design may not be the right word, but the purpose behind the death penalty was to create future hesitation in potential crime.
I think so. I think deterrence
Yes.
is an often used,
Cited,
cited reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think you might get the death penalty, maybe you'll have a
Think
second.
twice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you think twice. Of course, the alternative to the death penalty is life without possibility of parole. It's not like you ever get out.
Yeah.
So it's when you die in prison. Do you die sooner at the hands of the executioner, or do you die some years later at the hands of another inmate, or
That's true.
of some
That's
other
true.
disease? Or
Yeah,
old
and,
age?
and that's a good point too, because that there could be an argument made that life in prison without ever being able to get out is not a pretty life. It's not a welcoming life, and I would imagine that for somebody that has to be in prison for the rest of their life, for the crime of killing so many children, will probably not have a very comfortable life.
The only way, the most comfortable it could be,
Yeah.
would be if he were in a cell by himself for the rest of his life. He has a target on his back bigger than you. He is the head the inmates are hunting.
Yeah.
He's the guy that they want inside.
Yeah.
So he has no potential of being in population anywhere. He won't be able to be around anybody.
Yeah, that's
ever.
crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
You know,
That's-
I was talking to a jury one time, selecting a jury on a death penalty case, and during that jury selection process, you're looking for the individual views, attitudes on, are they in favor typically or against, why, is it
Yeah.
religious, is
Yeah.
it moral, is it what have you. And I was asking, and you're looking for people you think may go your way.
Of course.
It's part of jury selection.
Yeah, of course.
Part of the
6
trial.
and 6.
You want to win, right?
For sure.
At the end, to answer that question, absolutely.
Want to win. I
want
like
to
it.
win.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. All right, fair.
And I'm going to do everything I can to win.
Love it.
Within, ethical and professional boundaries.
Of course.
So I'm talking to this woman about her views of the death penalty, and she goes, "No, I'm against it. I'm against it." And I almost just said, "Thank you very much. I'm going to sit down." But then I said, maybe I should ask another question. Why? Why are you against it?
Okay.
And she goes, it's too good for him.
She must have been a mother.
So that checked a different box.
That totally checks a different box, and she probably. I can only imagine, how that must have been interpreted by everybody else there during jury selection. That probably was a great question to ask, because it probably set a good precedence for you for the future jurors. Let me ask this question. So, obviously, when you're trying death penalty cases, both at state and federal level, there's a lot at stake. Have you looked back on a mistake or a bob when you should have weaved scenario during any of those cases that might have been something that you would do differently?
Sure. Yeah. What I like about the trial work is we talked about it's the combination of all of those different life experiences that come together in the courtroom.
Yes.
And there's also a theater part of it. I think that's where some of my radio background helped. Just,
Absolutely.
the theater of
Yeah.
it. But it's unscripted. You have bullet points and you have an outline, but it's not acting.
Yeah.
So
it's not line by line.
Dynamic. It's and one word here may change the whole direction of the case.
Yes.
So you have to be attuned to hearing that word. If you miss that word,
Yeah.
even because you're not paying attention or it didn't register with
Yeah.
you, that can change the whole dynamic. And sure, you get all of that stuff, and you hope that you can figure it out in time to recover from it.
For sure.
And then, of course, there's the skill part of advocacy. The question that I usually regret is the one that I asked that I shouldn't have.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The one that was inarticulate or clumsy,
Okay.
or opened the door
Yeah.
for a skilled witness to march through. They say that there are 3 closing arguments that a lawyer is dealing with when they're at the end of the day. That's when you do the closing argument.
Yeah.
The trial starts with jury selection and then opening statement, where you introduce the issues and what you're really dealing with. And there's the testimony. And in a self-defense case, there has to be some evidence of self-defense, or you don't get a jury instruction. That's why I love self-defense stuff so much. That's my thing.
Interesting. I
these
like this.
days.
Yeah.
But at the end of the case, when all of the evidence is in and the judge has decided what instructions to give to the jury, those will be their guidelines. That's
Okay.
what they will fit the facts into to decide whether the law was broken, is the right guy on trial, what degree of offense, or was any offense actually proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But then at the end of all of that, you get your summation.
Yeah.
That's what most new lawyers think is why they live in the courtroom, so they can give that powerful closing argument.
I like it. Yeah.
I'm less persuaded over the years that that's the most important part, but that's the one that you get to wrap up and be emotional and dynamic, and you can actually argue as opposed to stating factual stuff.
Interesting.
So the comment is that that the lawyer deals with 3 of them.
Okay.
The one they prepare, right? The one they actually give. And then the third one gets to your point, the one you wish you'd given.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And every trial has that.
I'll bet.
Where you're kicking yourself, saying, "Oh man, how'd I forget to say that?" Or why did I say that?
But that's the beauty of having long track record of experience, is that you build upon that. You build upon those lessons learned. You try to use that as a catalyst for hopefully not making that same mistake down the road.
Yeah, and all of that, including a better appreciation for what your role is. And while it certainly cross-examination, it is all about you. And then in closing argument, it is all about you, because you're the one that you're asking everyone to focus their eyes and ears and attention on. That's the process. That's really not the goal.
Sure.
You really are the vehicle for them to see the case the way you do, but hopefully the way, if they will also see it that way, then you may have sown reasonable doubt.
Yes.
Or you may have established some basis that they can hold on to.
Absolutely.
They've got to go back in the jury room and defend their position.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue into the Zimmerman case and talking about the Zimmerman case. So, and we talked about this early in the beginning of the show, that this is coming up on 10-year anniversary of that. And that's, again, hard for me to fathom, because I just feel like it happened the other day. I imagine for you it's probably the same. So that case was unique in as far as all of your other cases because of the media and the media attention, or the tension surrounding the case that the media latched onto and then just fueled the fire. How was dealing with such a high-profile case where the media was an actual player in the courtroom?
I had certainly never had any experience close to that. I'd had plenty of cases that made the news. I'd had a couple of cases where there were cameras in the courtroom and the trials were being broadcast live on court TV or something like that.
Very nice.
But I never had a case that had this sort of media frenzy.
Oh, man.
It was like piranha.
Yeah.
Dropping a
piece of meat into the piranha field.
Yeah. And it was, I think, probably somewhat, I thought it was unique at the time. I'm not sure looking back that it was.
Well, it definitely is not alone in it's now, to me, it's part of a category of court battles in a sense now. I feel like this, I wouldn't say it's a trend. Maybe it is, but I seem to believe there's much more of the media being involved in the legal system nowadays.
Yes. This one, I think, was also the beginning of a pattern because it was my first experience having a very vocal, organized, orchestrated, funded third voice, and that was the representative of Trayvon Martin's family.
Interesting.
Trayvon Martin's family hired a lawyer named Ben Crump, who is a household name largely, especially civil rights stuff. Anytime there's a police shooting involving an African-American shooting victim, he typically shows up, not exclusively, but he's often there and promotes the civil rights aspect of it.
Okay.
But back in that day, he had one other case, I think, in the state of Florida. It was a prison killing where he had become somewhat well-known and secured a settlement. He's a civil lawyer. He's not a criminal defense lawyer. Trayvon Martin's family hired him when the Sanford Police Department didn't immediately arrest George Zimmerman. And Ben Crump did something brilliant, I guess, from his perspective. He hired a professional media person, and they just went to town. And I would have hoped that they would have modulated their message better because it was many of the things were said were not factually accurate, and they're extremely inflammatory, infuriating. This narrative had been created of George Zimmerman identifying, stalking, chasing, shooting an innocent child down in the street. And what I think was so troubling to me was that narrative got legs and it never slowed down.
Not at all.
There was very little truth and very little facts that were actually known in the case at that point. I guess I would have hoped that Mr. Crump had shown more restraint.
Yeah.
I don't think he knew a whole lot more than we did at that point, although we knew a lot because we at least had access to George Zimmerman.
Yeah.
And
so there's that.
But what really I thought was troubling in some ways is the media aspect of it. I think Ben Crump was representing his client the best way he thought, and that was to stir things up because the first thing they wanted was an arrest and then a conviction, and didn't really seem to matter how that happened. But the media didn't do any screening or qualifying or evaluating. It just seemed that anybody could get on national news and say whatever the hell they wanted to say, whether it had any basis in fact or not.
You mean they had an agenda? You're saying the media had an agenda there with no basis for facts? That's so crazy.
Well, what would that agenda be?
Yes.
In my view, the agenda simply was clicks or eyeballs or butts in the seat or whatever. They just want people to watch. And isn't that where we are now? See, this was 10 years ago. This was my first experience with social media and all the toxicity.
Oh, my God.
But as soon as it was infuriating, people would watch.
Yeah.
As soon as it was outrageous and offensive, people would watch.
Injustice.
And what actually happened, or even waiting to find out what actually happened, really took a back seat. I thought I tried the case with Mark O'Mara. Mark was hired by George, and Mark then asked, we talked about it back and forth, and I agreed, and I thought it was a good opportunity. This goes all the way back to when I said I took advantage of opportunities without being so concerned about whether I was going to get paid for it or being driven by that. I had no idea if I was going to get paid or not. There was money coming in. We thought we would, but I had a good position otherwise. I was on cruise control.
Yeah.
And then this was the most disruptive and maybe the most incredible experience I've ever had as a lawyer.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that I'd recommend it for everyone. But so we get involved. Mark is brilliant with the media.
Uh-huh.
He's patient. He's charming.
Yeah.
He's really good at that.
Yeah.
I was not as good with the media and didn't want to be as involved with it as he enjoyed it. So I really dug into the facts of the case. I really focused on the science.
Yeah.
Because my assessment of the way the media was running with this, that every juror that came into that courtroom was going to be affected by it. They were going to be tainted.
Absolutely. How can they
it.
not be? And that was one of my. So we talked about this a little earlier in the podcast, the integrity of the system, and ensuring that all parties have fair treatment in the legal system. And it seems to me that with the amount of traction and momentum that the media had and let's face it, painting George as the bad guy and without really any substantial facts to back it up, the public becomes aware of this. And that's where you choose your jurors, from the public, who has been somewhat influenced by the information, right or wrong, that's being disseminated. Because I always feel people will listen to who is yelling the loudest. They may not have the best way of measuring that message. They may just hear the loudest message and it just resonates in the back of their head. And so when you're calling for jurors, I have to believe that it substantially complicates your job as far as selecting an impartial juror, because there's so much information that's been out there. And they started pretty early in this case of their, media circus, if you will, because that's how I really looked at it. I didn't look at it in any way.
They were holding press conferences with witnesses.
Yeah.
People that wound up testifying and were saying they heard things and saw things, which they absolutely didn't.
It's all fabricated in that sense. It's all the part of the drama that the media took over. So I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue, because I'm anxious to hear what you had to say there.
Well, what was really fascinating about that is we thought about it. Where can we try this case where that doesn't exist within the state of Florida?
Yeah.
Because that was our choice. Where in the state of Florida could we go and likely have a jury that wasn't poisoned or tainted, or at least had so much knowledge that we would never be able to sort out the evidence from.
Yeah.
And we decided nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Why go anywhere if we can't find something better than where we are here? So that's kind of the full circle. Mark had been a prosecutor in Seminole County. That's where I had worked at the public defender's office. We knew all of the judges. We knew the court personnel. The prosecutor in the Zimmerman case was a special appointment by the governor. So that person was from out of town. They were out in Jacksonville. They didn't have the advantage, the home court advantage. Exactly.
Nice move.
We started thinking about that. And why don't we just sleep in our own beds? Let them sleep in the hotel.
It's a great strategy.
The assigned prosecutor, the elected prosecutor for that circuit, was kind of drummed out. It was pretty political. He probably wouldn't have charged anything. They sat on it. They wanted more evidence. They wanted some forensic stuff. And they were going to most likely convene a grand jury. Some of the higher-ranking officers in the police department were not very impressed with the evidence. They had a couple of eyewitnesses that supported what Zimmerman said. The forensics supported what Zimmerman said. So they were pretty reluctant. But now there had been thousands of people bussed in. There were marches, huge gatherings.
Yeah.
It was incendiary.
Yeah.
It was really, really something. So the governor appoints the new prosecutor, who was having her own political problems in Jacksonville and needed a win.
Oh, wow.
There's a whole side story to that.
Oh, that didn't go her way.
So she gets appointed and doesn't convene the grand jury, just doesn't hardly do any additional investigation, drafts this just half-assed probable cause affidavit, arrest warrant, and runs with it and just files the charges and runs. And that's how we got there.
Wow.
Had the case been prosecuted by the local prosecutor, would have been completely different.
Yeah. Interesting.
So then they wind up with Mark and me. Mark got the case. He didn't know if he'd get paid. I didn't know if I'd get paid. But we knew now we're about 30 years into our career that these don't come along very often. We didn't know how guilty or not guilty he was at that point.
Okay.
But we knew enough to know it's nowhere near what we were reading in the paper.
Interesting.
And that we would just take it on. And we did, literally. We were all in for a year.
Oh, my
it's
God.
all consuming.
And I don't think people can appreciate that. That case went on for a year.
More than a year.
More than a year, because then there was the civil side, too, that took place.
That was past that.
Oh,
the
good
criminal
Lord.
proceeding was over a year.
Holy cow. How was that? To be involved in a single case for that long?
There was plenty to do.
I suppose. I mean, but was it dragged on because of the media?
Well, in some ways, the case wasn't dragging on. In terms of the typical murder case, often takes a year and a half or so.
Okay.
This took, the incident was in February of 2012. The trial was in July of 2013. Much of that year was spent litigating issues in court. The prosecutors were not very forthcoming. We had to make them do pretty much everything they did in terms of releasing evidence. They withheld photographs that showed Zimmerman's bloody face and withheld evidence from witnesses. The whole thing was pretty ugly.
Really?
The way it was litigated.
Interesting.
We had 2 appeals.
What was the motivation behind that? What?
They didn't want to lose for all the wrong reasons.
Nice.
Yeah,
They didn't want to lose for all the wrong reasons.
And they were willing. This is what pisses me off so much when it comes right down to it.
Yes.
Unless they were complete idiots, they weren't. They were experienced trial lawyers.
For sure.
They had tried 100 murder cases among them. One guy had tried over 80 himself.
Shit.
And they knew how to evaluate a case. They knew what evidence was. They knew what the rules were.
Yeah.
They had done it over and over and over. They were willing. This is why it pisses me off so much. They were willing because of the external pressures, maybe the internal pressure of their own office, the political needs, all of that stuff. The pressures maybe from the social media or the social warriors. Yeah. They were willing to prosecute, convict, and let an innocent man spend the rest of his life in prison. Because that's what would have happened had he been convicted. He would have been sentenced to life in prison. Wow. And we could not let that happen. That's what it came down to. That was, it wasn't right.
Yeah.
We could not let that happen.
And was it overt? I mean, obviously you had to file to get critical pieces of evidence in your favor. Does that seem normal that they would withhold that information?
There are always battles in a big case between the defense and the prosecutor. What to turn over? What do they have to turn over? Is it open file? Florida has very, very liberal discovery. Not only are you supposed to get all those reports, you get to do some depositions, discovery depositions,
nice.
Which isn't common in criminal cases. And of course, United States Supreme Court case, Brady versus Maryland, means that the prosecutor has an independent responsibility to turn over evidence that might be exculpatory in some way. And that's a judgment call.
Okay.
Sometimes, and that's how most of these convictions get overturned years later, is when exculpatory evidence was discovered that wasn't overturned.
Sure.
So there's some hide the ball. I think there was some hide the ball in this. I think some of it was a lack of willingness to cooperate, and they just made it hard.
Yeah.
That was the game plan. Make it as hard as we can. Maybe they won't
Request
figure it out. Maybe they won't request
Yep.
it. Maybe they won't get it in
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And That was the strategy.
And it seems like it was. It seems as though there was enough knowledge on their part to recognize that this information would not support their. I guess it would damage their position. Some of that evidence, and so there was that. We're just going to keep this nice and tight and close to our chest unless they specifically ask for this, which means that you have to know it exists to be able to ask for it.
Yeah, so a lot of the investigation was figuring out what we didn't know.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Oh my God.
You know, you referenced the knock knock joke earlier.
Yes. Tell us about that. I wanted to get to that.
The opening statements, I think, tell what this case was really about when it got to the courtroom.
It makes sense to me now.
The prosecutor's opening was emotional. It started off with some cursing. You know, it was just these effing punks. You know,
yes.
And there was very little substance, just a lot of emotion. It was clear by that they didn't have the core case they needed to win based upon the evidence. They were really appealing to prejudice and emotion
and you knew that? You knew that?
I knew that, and you could also tell just the way they approached it.
So they were pushing a bad position from the beginning.
They could have pushed a winning position if we had dropped the ball.
Okay.
If we hadn't met them squarely.
Right.
It may have prevailed, but they didn't have the real evidence, so they had the emotion. So they do this, and then I'm doing the opening. That's the plan, and my goal is I'm going to turn it down emotionally. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the evidence that the prosecutor would normally talk about, but talk about it in a favorable way to the defense, and in a sense challenge the prosecution to prove me wrong. So I used pictures. I played the 911 call. I put in photographs. I did a timeline, mentioned witnesses by name. Typically, and I was criticized extensively for this in the media, an opening statement is kind of a window into the case, 15, 20 minutes, and sit down. My opening statement was a little over 3 hours. And,
wow.
After the prosecutor had done their inflammatory emotion string pulling thing, I thought that I had to do something to
bring it back.
Reboot.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Well, a guy had told me a joke in the gym the other day. Would that work? Would that be a way that the jury would go, let's forget that part and now listen? I should have asked other people
for advice.
Yeah. That was not the shining moment. Although it was still a funny joke, I thought. It wasn't the right place.
I thought it was a hilarious joke.
In that context. The prosecutor was interrupting me. I had a pretty good story to tell.
Yeah.
I said something that I thought, looking back, was a really smart introduction to this case.
Yeah.
Because I told the jury, there are no monsters here.
Yeah.
As a preface to George Zimmerman, who he was, what he was doing. Trayvon Martin wasn't a monster. He was a 17-year-old kid that was having some life issues and trying to find himself.
Yeah.
And he's in an environment that he's unfamiliar with. He was visiting from Miami. And I thought that one of the ways to break
the ice
would be on the knock-knock joke. Now, carve that out.
Perfect. It's grand slam, right? So I got to share this. This is too funny because the very first time that I was jumping out of an airplane skydiving in the military, you go through this extensive what they call ground week, and you learn about all the intricacies. You learn how to pack your parachute. You learn how your harness is worn. You learn how to deploy and emergency procedures, and then it's not until after you complete that week that you go and you actually get a chance to jump out of an airplane. And so the way they do it is that you have a chaser. The chaser is there to kind of follow you to make sure you save your own life. And the way they run the aircraft is there'll be about maybe 10, 12 students, and they might have a chaser for each of them. It just depends on the availability. And they launch you out in like little segments, and they call them sticks. So stick 1, stick 2, stick 3. So I'm the first jumper and the first stick on the first pass. So the very first person to jump out of an airplane. And the way you jump out of the airplane is you back up to the ramp. So you can't even look, your back is to the ramp. And so the chaser will then tell you to go ahead and go. And you're supposed to just jump into the unknown, right? So you can't see where you're jumping. There's a little anxiety involved there. And so I was sweating bullets, literally. And my chaser leans up, and there's the roar of the aircraft. The doors open, so it's really hard to hear him. But he leans into me, and he tells me a joke, which to this day I cannot remember. I cannot remember the joke. But as soon as I start barrel laughing, I'm just laughing. He just pushes me out. And all I can remember is I'm falling out of the airplane, and I can see the tail, and then I can see the ramp, and then all of a sudden I can see the earth. And it dawns on me that I'm not in the airplane anymore. So I'm laughing this entire time. So that's the first part of the story. The second part is like I get on the ground, everything was great. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't that bad. That's awesome. So we get up, we get ready for our second jump. First pass, first stick, first jumper. And my chaser's got it by our chest strap right there, and we're waiting, and the jump master gives the go. And I'm like, what's the joke? And he looks at me, he's like, there's no joke. You got to do this on your own now. And I was like mortified. I was like, no. So I can appreciate the breaking of the ice with a good joke. So you have my full support on that one. And I'm sorry it didn't work well in the courtroom, but I thought it was still kind of like still really a good way to kind of counter the effect from
the right idea.
Maybe not
poor execution,
okay,
maybe poor choice. I tell you though, that's an interesting comment as I think back on it. This thing was broadcast around the clock. Anytime we were in court, we were on national television.
Hell yeah.
And it took me a while to really figure that out. Remember we talked about tunnel vision.
Yeah.
I imagine when you were in that airplane, you weren't really...
I didn't see crap. I mean, I saw just...
And I'm used to trying cases where the only people that matter at the end of the day are that jury.
Yeah.
So everything is modulated and moderated, monitored for them. When I stood up to do that opening statement, I didn't realize in a true sense all those other people behind me, around me. I was oblivious to the cameras in my mind.
Yeah.
I was looking at that jury.
The jurors, yeah.
And frankly, it wasn't a bad joke for that jury.
I thought it was hilarious.
And it would have been the icebreaker. And we had spent a couple of weeks with them during jury selection.
You
knew who had a sense of humor, who didn't. But I completely failed. I had my trial goggles. I completely failed to appreciate the ripple effect of that. It would be considered disrespectful. Trayvon Martin's family would be offended, thinking I was mocking them. All of that stuff that doesn't typically enter in because you're not trying a case in front of the whole world. So I regret going there. I don't regret the idea.
No.
Nothing really would have changed if I had just said, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to tell you about this case." Instead of the
knock joke. But I still think you should get mad props for doing that. I mean, granted, if the media hadn't been around and extrapolate the media and their influence at that time period and it be more of a, let's just say maybe a normal case. I think the knock joke would have been a great diffuser of the tension in the courthouse at that point.
I've told jokes before. I've made attempted humor before with never any negative.
Exactly.
Interesting. I thought I knew those people pretty well.
The jurors?
Yeah, by that time. You size people up all the time. I mean, that's what everything is, sizing the other person up. I had spent enough time with them feeling that I had sized them up. You kind of, when you size somebody up, you put a line that you think you can go to. And if you cross, you may become, but you think you know where that line is. If you've misjudged, then there can be some problems. But we do that all the time, all day long. You figure out where that line is.
I agree.
And I felt that was still up to maybe, but not across the line with that jury. And like you say, if I had didn't have all the other stuff and noise in the background, it may have been a very different. They were afraid to laugh.
Oh yeah,
The
because
whole thing just fell flat.
that's what I'm saying. The media had such an impact on that. Let me ask you this question because I still want to get to some other stuff here. 2 questions, really. Do you feel that the media is now an impartial member of the legal system at this day and age where we're at right now?
The simple answer is no.
Okay.
The harder answer is defining media. And then the harder one is, even if they're well-intended, do they actually do it?
Correct.
There are some media that just don't give a shit. They
Yeah.
don't care what they say as long as
Absolutely.
it gets ratings.
That's all they're looking for.
Then there's, I think, some people that try, but they are not well enough informed to really be able to provide reliable analysis that's helpful.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I mean, I like the idea that they're not like your simple answer of no, but as a bystander watching this from the outside, it's really hard to swallow that completely. Like, no, they don't have that type of influence. My hope is that that you're right, and that this doesn't affect future cases or future people that are innocent that are tried by the court of public appeal and damned for it, in a sense.
Well, it was pretty clear to us when we were doing jury selection, the view of the case was going to be guided by what news they watched regularly. That was shaping. Sorry,
that's okay.
Shaping their view of the case.
Absolutely.
And well, we've had some high-profile self-defense cases since then.
Yeah.
Kyle Rittenhouse was another opportunity for the media to get it right.
Yeah.
And some did a little better.
I think there was some. I would agree with you that there was a few that tried. And I think that sometimes the few that try are also facing an uphill battle within their own organization.
I don't know if there's any mainstream news outlets that one could, with a straight face, say are impartial.
Yeah.
The old days, referring back to those old days, many of them before my days, and mine go back far enough, it was, 20, 25 minutes of news, and then a minute or two of opinion.
Yeah.
And that was how the evening news and
that was the
millions,
news.
That was the news. Now it's pretty well flipped on its head, isn't it?
Without a doubt. All right, second question. Would you take on a case like this again? Like a case. Let's just paint a picture of a similar kind of set of circumstances. It's a self-defense case. There's potentially the racial undertones involved in it. There's the potential for the media involvement. There's you yourself are going to be also a target in this case. I imagine you were a target during the Zimmerman case as well.
Oh boy.
So how are you feeling about taking on another case like that moving forward?
It is all-consuming, of course, just because there's a lot of work to do, and that's compounded by the media involvement. Because it's all-consuming, it results in personal sacrifice. Man. Not so much for me, since I love doing it, but it does for my family, for other parts of my life.
Absolutely.
So I have to be willing to do that. I also have to be willing to accept the fact that there may be very real danger. I don't know that there was really real danger. There was certainly lots of threats in every form, phone, mail, email, all of that stuff. It's a battle, so you have to be emotionally prepared and strong enough physically, emotionally to take it on.
Yeah.
And knowing full well that it's going to be your life for as long as that takes, a year or two, one would think. So I would say yes and no.
I would diplomatic answer there.
I would say yes. My wife would say no.
I hear you. That's why it's a very diplomatic answer. Mm-hmm. Well done. Well played. I like that. Well, let's talk about some of the stuff that you're doing currently. In particular, how you're taking your expertise and your experience and assisting with organizations like CCW Safe in creating a panel of vetted trial lawyers that folks like myself can gain access to. How did that kind of come about? What was this future vision for Don? Like, I want to embolden other trial lawyers to be as successful as I am in seeking justice and whatnot, and making sure everybody has a fair shake.
Not quite that lofty.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So we're post Zimmerman now.
Yeah.
I'm deciding what to do for a living, if anything, and decide that I'll do some work and see where it goes.
Okay.
I over the career, when you handle a lot of murder cases, eventually some of them are going to be self-defense.
Yeah.
And within that larger group of self-defense cases, there's actually going to be some good self-defense cases.
Yeah.
Anybody can claim self-defense, and
Sure.
you often hear that.
Yeah.
But there truly are legally, factually innocent people that are prosecuted for murder who acted in self-defense.
Yeah.
And I know that far beyond George Zimmerman, because what I think I brought to the case was having tried several of those prior to the Zimmerman case. I don't think Mark has had a criminal defense career for 30 years. I don't know that he's ever, 40 years now, he's probably never tried that kind of self-defense case. And nothing I did other than I happened to get those clients.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about that kind of self-defense, we're talking about an armed defender shooting and killing a person that's considered to be unarmed.
Okay.
And then charged with murder.
Yeah.
And then the prosecutors saying things like, well, shouldn't have brought a gun to a fist fight.
Yeah, yeah.
Over and over.
Yeah, yeah.
again. And those cases go to trial. And I had tried several of them.
Yeah.
And high stakes.
Yeah.
I like I like that part anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Self-defense cases are really even more interesting. The run-of-the-mill murder case often is it first degree? Is it second degree? Can you get a deal for manslaughter?
Yeah, yeah.
Self-defense cases, more than any other criminal case I've had, are all or nothing.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground.
Yeah.
It's either legal or it's not.
Yes.
And you're going to go out one door to spend the rest of your life with your family and friends. You go out the other door and spend the rest of your life in prison, or a big chunk of it. So,
yeah.
And I liked the self-defense stuff because most of the time it's pretty normal, regular people that cross paths with some other person that is often normal and regular, but for some reason these two guys together and it goes off. So I had a self-defense inclination. I liked those cases. I would seek them out, and I tried a few of them. So just, again, serendipity, my path crossed with the guys from CCW Safe. I attended a little presentation that the Sanford police captain was giving.
Nice.
And I was there to listen and talk, and Mike Darter and Stan were there.
Yeah,
and,
love those guys.
We just introduced ourselves, and we figured out who we were, and then just started talking.
Nice.
And I was at one point going to be a member of this network. But I liked them. I really liked what they were doing. The more I dug into how they handled that business, the more I respected it.
Yes.
Because I knew from the inside where you needed to spend the money and where you didn't really need to.
Yes.
And when you really had to make the tough decisions on hiring people that would affect the outcome of the case. So we just connected, and that sort of evolved over the last few years.
Nice.
And my position with CCW Safe is as National Trial Counsel. What I especially like about it is I often regularly interact with the members that are involved in the self-defense incidents. Sometimes the first person they talk to in the company. My role then extends to identifying and then retaining counsel for them.
Yes.
Interacting, helping them with experts and investigators, and helping sort of manage the case. Not so much providing direct representation, more strategy stuff. But I do have the option to actually sign on as co-counsel if I choose to. And I like that part of it. I really, because that's really almost like practicing.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have strategically positioned yourself to where you now just have a steady flow almost of opportunity to review and if choose to participate.
Yeah, that's the benefit to me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm tracking. I'm seeing where you're going with that. That's a smart move. You had said something just a few minutes ago, and I wanted to. You had said something about how you liked how they did it from the inside. What did you mean by that? Like your experience showed you that you liked the way they did it from the inside, but what does that really mean?
What it means to me is, as a trial lawyer, while every case is different, there are certainly lots of similarities.
Yeah.
In general kinds of similarities.
Yeah.
You know what the steps are going to be in the case from beginning to end. That's no secret.
Yeah.
You know where you might be able to benefit from an expert, a use of force expert.
Right.
Maybe we had a forensic pathologist in the Zimmerman case.
Interesting.
That kind of saved the day in my mind because it focused the jury on the science.
Nice.
Brilliant forensic pathologist, former medical examiner for Bexar County.
No
just
way.
Just passed a few days ago.
Oh, that's terrible
Vincent
news.
DeMaio.
Okay,
Wrote the book on gunshots.
No kidding.
Gunshot injuries. And he willingly came and testified in the case. We had a case with CCW Safe a few years ago where we hired a forensic pathologist that, in my view, made all the difference.
Wow.
So CCW Safe's view of a case is that we will spend as much money as it takes to get the job done. So they don't put limits on attorney's fees.
Nice.
They don't put limits on expert or investigation fees or whatever it takes to put on the best case in the courtroom. So what you don't have to fear is running out of money halfway through and having to make the decision, do we call this expert or hire this investigator?
Right, but we can't do both.
And that's really far-sighted.
Yeah.
That's seeing the goal line and doing what you need to get to the goal line.
Oh, man.
One of the biggest struggles you have as a lawyer in private practice is getting enough money to do your job well.
Yeah.
And those guys cover all that. Now, not every case is a George Zimmerman or a Carl Rittenhouse.
Of course.
And we know there are parameters.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
from internally, they can manage that.
Yeah.
But their philosophy and their goal is to provide that quality, that level of service, and that's really impressed me. That's why I'm with them.
And that is what resonates with me. And in fact, I remember when I first met you, we were there talking with CCW Safe, and it really was important for me to kind of learn a little bit more, just like you, due diligence on them and how they work. I feel as though they offer something that is probably the hardest thing to get at that time period, given the circumstances, which is peace of mind, that you will have the representation that you deserve for whatever issues that you're facing.
So we got a call the other day. I took the call, actually, and this guy was a member of a couple of organizations. Some people do that. Will belong to a couple of these.
Kind of hedge their bets.
Legal defense expense things. I don't know why, but that's their decision. And remarkably, it's pretty inexpensive. It's catastrophic coverage.
Yeah.
I mean, the company may spend $500,000 on your case, but you're only spending a few hundred a year. So people hedge, cover.
I like it.
And he called me and he said he'd called the other company to make his claim, and he had court coming up, and he was an older guy, and he was having trouble putting all the pieces together, and he needed counsel for this thing. And he said he talked to the other company, and they confirmed that he was a member, and they just sent him a list of lawyers and said, call us when you find somebody.
Wow.
This guy was completely incapable of sorting that out. Most people are.
I would say.
If you had a list of 15 lawyers, would you know
who is the one that you want?
Yeah, who even practices criminal law or has had experience in self-defense cases. So
No.
we're service, we're value, I think, is focusing on the individual member in that moment and helping them get through it. And if the member has a lawyer they know of, they like, want to represent them, I will agree to hire them. I'll vet them to
For
be
sure.
that it's not just their friend's friend who does divorces.
Yeah. Their cousin Vinny.
Best legal movie of all time.
I love that movie, man.
Well, and then if they don't have a lawyer, then I find one.
Nice.
And give them that option. So
Well,
nobody gets kind of hung out there.
I love hearing that. Let's start wrapping it up. What's the biggest takeaway you want the listeners to learn from your 35 plus years of litigation experience or attorney experience? What would you say is the biggest lesson learned for our listeners, I should say?
I can't answer that so broadly that it might be useful to all of the listeners.
Fair enough.
I can talk about people that are listening that are thinking of going to law school or some other service-type profession where they're interacting with people.
For sure.
And that is to actually be one yourself. Be a real person. Have life experiences. Don't start from high school, go to college, then to graduate school, and then go into the world thinking you know anything about it.
I love that.
Take a year off, wash some dishes, lay some bricks, and know the people that you're going to be serving, because there's a whole lot more to life than just taking temperatures or going to bail hearings.
There used to be this thought process that, I've traveled throughout the world and I've seen a lot of different countries and how they work, and several countries still use conscripts, and that you have to put your time in and then you can go back into your life. And I've often thought that in America, what would be a good substitute for conscripts would be having to work in the service industry, a waiter, a bartender, a cab driver, somebody that has that direct contact with people, so that whether you put your year in as a waitress, and then you go about your business, but that year has hopefully helped to provide you with that sense of genuineness that treat everybody the way that you want to be treated moving forward. So that's kind of like my pie in the sky vision of and we don't need a conscript army, we need conscript service industry kind of people.
That helps you get out of your own skin. I'd read a book, a very famous author who made some comments. Maybe it was during a commencement speech or something. The next time somebody's rude to you, or they're in line with you in the grocery store and they do something that you don't like, take a second before you get mad at them or make fun of them or get sarcastic or snarky or judgmental. Just maybe think for a second, you don't know how they got there. You don't know what their day was like, what their life has been like, and maybe just for a second, cut them some slack.
100%. I think we could all benefit from that type of a pause before jumping off the handle. Agreed. I love that. All right, where can folks learn more about you, or potentially even pursue some sort of, if they want to hire you, where may they go to find stuff like that? I
do have a website. I don't pay much attention to it these days because I'm not looking for a lot of work. I absolutely would take that right case.
Fair enough.
And I will consult on cases outside of CCW Safe.
Nice.
I would even co-counsel
cases.
If you need to get a hold of me, the website is donwestlaw.com.
Perfect.
donwest@donwestlaw.com is an email address. CCW Safe is ccwsafe.com.
Nice.
And there's some additional background about the company and me.
Yeah. That would be awesome. All right, folks. Well, that's a wrap. I want to thank you, Don, for coming on. It was awesome to learn a little bit more about you. I appreciate you sharing all this stuff, and particularly your hard-earned experience that you've attributed over the last 35 plus years. Thanks, folks, for tuning in. I want to thank our supporters. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank the men and women who are holding the line right now. You can check out previous podcasts by visiting thebulletproofworkshop.com. You can learn more about me and training opportunities by visiting tridentconcepts.com. Until then, I'm Jeff Gonzalez, and you're listening to the Bulletproof Workshop Podcast. Until then, stay safe or be dangerous.